Hi, my name is Cole Shazinski, and I'm presenting on media and crime and their influence on society. So, to begin with, what I know about the influence of mass media on crime and deviance. Well, we know that mass media is kind of the main source of information for most Americans in our society, and we see the effects of how it can negatively portray and create a massive fear influence dynamic for crime, as it typically only shows when events happen and kind of create a negative view of that kind of topic or situation. However, the media also never really goes into depth or even really explains on what's being used as measures against these kinds of crimes, and how the police and nation are able to prevent them. Often cases you really only see when these kinds of crimes happen rather than how these crimes are prevented in the first place. And this also kind of goes in with the growth of social media as newer and younger generations are growing older and looking for something to relay information. Social media has become one of these main sources of information for these younger generations, and oftentimes it is oversaturated with this kind of news and oftentimes has false or fake news embedded into it. So we see how the fear of crime is spread through mass media as it's kind of the main source of information, and oftentimes it's used to spread a specific type of agenda. And we also can see how the growth of social media kind of oversaturates the news with fake and real news and kind of doesn't really give a correct representation. And that's kind of what these forms of media present. Does mass media create unwarranted levels of fear of crime in society? And to a degree, I would have to say yes. Looking at Dolliver and Intravia's work, we see how mass media is kind of seen as the primary source of information in general, but also the primary source of crime information within the United States itself, as news reporters are typically the first people to kind of spread this information before newspapers, articles, and journals are able to express this sort of thing. And it's also to a wider audience. And we also can see in both of these articles that media consumption increases fear of its citizens as more and more people are consuming more and more media. We see how the fear is amplified as the message is being spread upon multiple platforms and consistently throughout either the day of a said crime or violent act, or how these things can kind of just spiral out of control without firm and complete factual evidence. And Dolliver goes into the cultivation theory, which kind of discusses media, uh, that those who watch television and other forms of media often are more likely to believe that the programming content is a description of reality. So not only are they possibly being fed information that may not be entirely true, but also has a bias to it. So, how do the perceptions of crime reinforce social labels and stereotypes in society? Well, to kind of go off of Saleh's article, I think that's how you pronounce it. Law is a social institution that relies heavily on language to develop syncratic models and constructs of reality defined by consensus from within various legal communities about how a closed linguistic system should best reflect the outside world. Now, what this kind of really goes into is talking about how society creates positive and negative stereotypes. Right below here, I have two different stereotypes that revolve around the same culture and community of African American women, the crack mother icon and the mammy figure. The mammy figure itself presents a positive and kind of better opinion of these women who are reliant and also supportive of white familiar uh, families. And Carpenter also goes more into these figures, describing how the crack mother icon kind of evolves from different stereotypes, but combines them into a negative aspect, as it is seen as a woman who is almost subhuman, and that she is at once lascivious and manipulative, meaning they'll do whatever it takes to get their essentially their high or drug. So, and that, to kind of reinforce that, emphasizes how these stereotypes are kind of portrayed through crime, as it is seen that these people are more likely to commit a crime such as the crack mothers compared to the mammy figure. So the Bureau of Justice Statistics, to kind of briefly cover this since we're running out of time, the Bureau of Justice described into two forms of prisons when looking at their prison sentences, and that's between state and federal. Now, from 2019 back to early 2010 or late 2000s, we see a rise in prison admissions within these past few years. And we see how in state prisons, drugs, property, public, and violent forms of crime are extremely high, whereas in federal prisons, it's only violent. And when we discuss our textbook, we see how the textbook focuses on deviancy and drugs, at least from the chapters we've read, rather than complete violent acts, and how the textbook focuses on these criminal acts as a form of people that are outside of the societal norms, so to speak. So, theoretical perspectives on deviance. So, to kind of discuss theoretical perspectives on deviance, the one theory that I found interesting and wanted to discuss more about was the social disorganization theory, which essentially talks about how social disorganization theory asserts that crime is most likely to occur in communities with weak social ties and the absence of social control, which is defined by researchers at the University of Chicago in the article about theoretical perspectives on deviance. And this kind of shows how crime is not out of want, but more primarily out of necessity, as there's an absence of social control. And we see that in poor neighborhoods, there's more likely to be a higher rate of drug substance abuse or use, violence, and teenage delinquency. So I think that's something that resonated with me, and I found that this perspective should be shared. So here's my bibliography. These are all the sources we've used, or I used and covered for this presentation. Thank you for listening.